All the gin joints and all the towns in all the world.
Greetings game geeks and film fans, and welcome once again to VGM, your one-stop shop for everything video games and movies. This month we're casting the analytical microscope on Konami's sexed-up reboot of beloved NES classic Castlevania. We'll be giving you the lowdown on where it all began for the franchise. Lords of Shadow is also packed full of juicy film influences, and as ever, we'll be sucking up the tastiest silver screen morsels for your viewing pleasure. We've got a top 5 rundown too, so get ready for VGM's definitive list of the top fantasy cliches around. Do not pretend that you're not excited. In a recent interview, Lords of Shadow producer David Cox said that one of his biggest influences was the latest Star Trek film. Now don't worry folks, we're not about to go all sci-fi on you. The only Klingons you'll see around here are David Bowie's trousers. What David Cox meant was, like Star Trek, it was time for the Castlevania franchise to get a swanky reboot. For those of you who don't know, Lords of Shadow comes from a rich gaming heritage that all began in humble 8-bit. Castlevania was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1987, and although not a massive commercial success, the fresh mixture of platforming, whip-cracking and monster-mashing action garnered a cult following. Castlevania took huge inspiration from early horror films, with your character Simon Belmont battling Frankenstein's monster, cursed mummies, and even ultimate horror villain himself, Dracula. Konami have taken some of the finest ingredients from the original and sprinkled them throughout Lords of Shadow. Here are some of our favourites. The very first shot from the original sees your character making his way to some imposing looking gates. Cut to 2010 and the gates are back and looking as menacing as ever. The whip makes a welcome return, well, sort of. This time you're armed with the Combat Cross, a devastating long-range weapon with bags of upgrade potential, much like the original, only this time it looks a lot cooler. The map screen's got a facelift, and of course the monsters are back. Vampires, little red gremlins, zombies and werewolves. Only here they are slightly more terrifying than your common suburban wolfman.
Tell me, warrior, are you aware of what is happening in the world?
So how does Lords of Shadow compare? Well, frankly, we think it's the bee's knees. Who wouldn't want to tear around an alternative medieval Europe, ripping all manner of hellspawn a brand new one? Especially when it looks as nice as this. Yep, Lords of Shadow is a looker, and the combat is accurate, meaty, and oh so satisfying. Plus main man, Gabriel Belmont, is a total badass. There's a couple of gripes, namely over linear level design. There's no option to control the camera, which at times becomes incredibly annoying, and a plot as flimsy as Belmont's beard. But you're here because you want to know what movies influenced Castlevania, right? Well, in the past, we'd have pointed you in the direction of any classic horror title. These days, however, Castlevania has adopted more of a fantasy feel, with bits of horror thrown in for good measure. We reckon this reflects the ever-changing target demographic.
Come here.
People don't want to watch vampire movies nowadays unless they involve fresh-faced pretty boys, vomit-inducing plotlines.
Go home. And don't come back. Or you're gonna get hurt.
And enough shampoo to sink a battleship. A horror fantasy crossover is what we're talking about here. Pun well intended. Without wanting to state the bleeding obvious too much, there's nothing that Castlevania does better than, well, castles. You just need to take a look at any classic story from the horror era and you'll clearly see the influences these have had, not just on Castlevania, but on horror culture in its entirety. Big, menacing buildings are a staple of the genre. The mysteries they hide, the terrors they conceal. Even Hitchcock classic Psycho is a victim of creepy house syndrome. Just look at Norman's mum's welcoming abode. What's that? Afternoon tea, Mrs. Bates? I'd love to, but I actually promised Freddie I'd go to his slumber party. Then of course there's the daunting maze area, just like in the 80s cult favourite Labyrinth. Maybe not, but it gives us another excuse to traumatise you with the imagery of David Bowie's trousers. Jump, magic, jump, magic, jump, magic. This wouldn't be a fantasy analysis worth its salt if we didn't throw in a bit more Tolkien, so here you go. Notice the web-filled tunnels in Chapter 2. They bear more than a passing resemblance to the frankly horrifying Shelob's lair from Return of the King. And when the slobbering arachnid itself finally shows its boggle-eyed face, well, that spider is ripped straight out of the movies. Even the camera shots are identical.
He will not touch him again!
Scuttle away from that, you silk-spinning nuisance.
There are dead things! Dead faces in the water!
Also worth mentioning is the Dead Bog level, very reminiscent of the Dead Marshes in the Two Towers. They've even got that bone-chilling, ghostly whisper coming out of the depths.
Who are you?
I am Gabriel. I have travelled here seeking the Guardian of the Lake.
So let's start with Belmont. With his flowing brown locks and 5 o'clock shadow, not to mention his penchant for carving up demons like a human meat grinder, he certainly bears a striking resemblance to Lord of the Rings' Aragorn. Stoic, softly spoken, and shit-hot with the blade.
My love, the Elders of the Order hope that you can help us to understand what is happening.
And let's not forget Belmont's Scottish brogue. He is of course voiced by TV and cinema veteran Robert Carlyle, which leaves us with this simple equation: Aragorn plus Hamish Macbeth equals Gabrielle Belmont. So good looking, much like all fantasy heroes. What's that, Legolas? 3,000-year-old male seeks pointy-eared companion for woodland fun and frolics? Just how many dating websites are you on?
I'm on 17!
Well, we hope you mentioned you're not a real blonde. Your eyebrows are a dead giveaway.
I am the guardian of the Lake of Oblivion.
Also worth a mention is horny deity Pan. We're sure most of you will have noticed the similarities between Castlevania's rendition of the mythical goat and the titular character in Guillermo del Toro's sublime Pan's Labyrinth. Even their earthy interior decor is similar. Moss-covered rock and earthworms. Now you won't find that in your local IKEA.
Give me your dagger, quickly!
And then there's Zobek, voiced with authoritative gravitas by legendary thespian Patrick Stewart.
Word has spread of our quest.
Although when you think about it, he looks pretty similar to Sean Connery's Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Seriously, what the hell is that name about? In the 1986 Celtic Bloodfest, Highlander. You wonder if Konami perhaps wanted old Sean himself to voice Zobek, but Patrick Stewart was probably cheaper.
Don't kill me! Let me live, please! Punish me, torture me, but let me live!
Now, it wouldn't be a horror story unless you were tasked with impaling a few vampires, and that's mainly what Castlevania tasks you with doing.
Get me a piece of stone, anything, to help me drive the stake through their heart.
Again, classic horror is the influence here. It's not just maggoty bloodsuckers with extreme dental health issues either. There's also a couple of high-born vampires present. One even has you playing chess against her. How very upper class. Your zombie just got pawned. You even get to explore Dr. Frankenstein's lab, where he's been conducting all sorts of diabolical experiments, including this Duracell-powered 8-legged pest.
He's alive!
Oh wait, no it's not. Also, notice your purple-tinged dark crystal. Did you know that's from a Muppet movie? Well, you do now. The aptly named Dark Crystal is probably Jim Henson's finest and darkest work.
Feel the power of the Dark Crystal.
If you're yet to see it, we'll recommend you do so pronto.
My wife, Marie, was murdered not 2 days ago by the evil that roams these lands.
There's also a Lord of the Rings style undercurrent to the proceedings, with Gabriel's main quest being to save his murdered wife and bring her back from the grave. While strictly speaking, Arwen hasn't popped her immortal elf clogs just yet, but the theme of her impending death is prevalent throughout the trilogy, with Aragorn tormented by visions of her once pert physique gone all saggy.
I choose a mortal life. I wish I could have seen you. last time.
So that brings us nicely to our countdown. Everybody loves a good top 5, and this month it's fantasy cliches. At 5, we've got bearded mentors. Rest assured that old Grandad Smartass will be right around the corner to guide you with a twinkle in the eye, pipe in the mouth, and most likely rheumatism in the spine. Gandalf, Dumbledore, Zobek, all beardy know-it-alls, all of whom die or pretend to, like we give a toss.
Welcome, Your Majesty.
At 4, we've got orcs. Working class orcs. I mean, for crying out loud, were they all bred in Peckham? They all seem content to live in squalor, biting each other and collecting bits of crappy armour like their asbos. That's why they're such easy sword fodder. The true chavs of the Tolkien world.
Sauron moves to strike the city of Minas Tirith.
Making up our 3rd spot, it's stupid names.
If the beacons of Gondor are lit, Rohan must be ready for war.
Burglecut?
I have destroyed the castle of Galadorn.
Are you a gelfling?
Because, let's be honest, if the self-proclaimed bringer of death, harbinger of destruction, betrayer of hope, and lord of all chaos turned up on your doorstep and told you his name was
Tim? Greetings, Tim the Enchanter.
You'd laugh your ass off. Just missing out on top spot, we've got choir boys. Ah, the beautiful sound of a falsetto sung by a bunch of 11-year-old boys is always the perfect accompaniment to any stroll through a picturesque fantasy valley. Until your balls drop, of course, then you're used exclusively for action scenes. You're 16, you say? In the Balrog section you go. So what's the #1 fantasy cliche? Well, it can only be classically trained British thespians. Over here in Blighty, we come packing with the finest in wand-waving talent. We've got McKellen, Gambon, Patrick, Ruddy, Stewart. Fact is, if you're thinking of making a fantasy masterpiece and it doesn't have one of these esteemed gents in it, or Sean Bean, then it's going to suck wrinkly wizard balls. So there you have it. When you think about it, horror and fantasy are pretty good bedmates, and Castlevania Lords of Shadow is living proof. It's a rip-roaring feast of vampire slaying, girlfriend saving brilliance, and it's definitely one that should be sitting in your gaming collection. And we hope we've given you a good excuse to pop down your local video store and check out some of those movies too. If you think there's anything we forgot to mention, or just want to tell us we rock, then give us a kick up the arse in the comments box. We always reply, because we're nice. VGM out, until next time.